All right, we're back. We are COMP397. That's Web Game Programming in the Fall 2018 semester at Centennial, and we're week 10, part 1. I should have put part 1 of our broadcast, game controls and animation. We're going to be talking about today. I think it's a key part again. We're going to be using some existing code today, but before we get there, I want to start talking about the stuff we're doing and the stuff that's due today, or this week. All right, so let's take a look. So again, we're into the last part of our course. Week 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 is where everything is due. And there's a lot of work to do. Lots of work coming from other courses as well, I'm sure, at this point. But let's take a look. So this week, our beta release and peer review 4 is due. Are you guys good with your beta release? So what is that? What is the beta release and what's peer review 4? Beta is worth 10% of your final grade. That's due today, right? By midnight. So first question, do you guys need more time? How are you guys doing with your beta release? Like, would it be better for tomorrow? You know, do you need an extra day to put things together, your documentation, your stuff, whatever? If you need an extra day, I'll give it to you. But that means your Sunday is going to be ruined, right? It's already ruined. It's already ruined. I'm just saying, that's the thing. If I give it to you, you'll take the extra time and your Sunday will be ruined, right? And that's bad. Huh? I can do that with you. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's look at it. So that's what's due. I don't know if I have a Dropbox for this beta release yet. I will put one together. Please don't let me leave without doing that. I want to make sure that you have a place to release. There's also going to put your peer review 4. That's also due. That's like something you've been doing. And then starting next week, we're going to be doing in-class play testing. So what does that mean is I want you guys to play each other's games. Okay. So, you know, show me your game, get feedback. And then over the next couple weeks, so week 11 and week 12, I want you to make all your tweaking changes. So as of today, after you hand in your beta, that's it, guys. This is like code freeze, all right? I want you to consider it that all you're doing is really fixing bugs and anything that's minor, but no new big features, all right? Because that would just not make any sense, okay? So that's what's really due today, again, by the end of class or end of midnight. If you guys have more time, need more time, let me know. Your final release is not due by the end. It's due week 13. So you have a couple weeks, so next week and the week after, to do your testing. Week 13, your final release is due. So that is going to be everything, all your changes, and there's no more coding after that. So after week 13, your coding is done. Week 14, the last week of class, which is your exam week, is only going to be for presentations. So far, I only see 2 groups here. I don't know what happened to this group, but if there's only these 2 groups, that means, guys, you're going to have like maybe a half an hour or an hour of time on that Saturday, and then sayonara, right? I'll see you when I see you, right? So I don't expect it to be so bad because you should be building all the stuff that you have so far on your team and your game so that you have something to show me for the final week, okay? All right, any questions around what's due and all the you know, your this whole thing, this you know, kind of direction of where we're going. Okay, without further ado, then let's get into the code part. So, okay, I mean, I do this every time, but let's do it again. So last time we were together, we were looking at week 9 stuff. I'm going to make a copy of week 9 and it's going to be, we're going to just rename it week 10. I'm going to put this up on GitHub, create a new repo, all this kind of stuff. You guys have had the real benefit of, you know, having a chance to work with a more complex code than other seasons of this COMP397 with me, only because you guys are mostly game students, so I've pushed you in terms of code a little bit more. I think it's a good thing, guys. I think that, you know, the more we push ourselves, then the more we can produce. Some of the same stuff I'm talking to you about here in COMP397 is similar to what you would be using if you're going to make your own code in another language, C# or C++, whatever. A lot of the stuff I'm giving you is reusable. There's going to be some new things, though. I mean, if you're going to work in another language base altogether, like, for example, C++, there's other considerations. Okay. So yeah. So this is our file. This is less than 10. Let's make some minor changes here to these things. Our package.json file is also less than 10. And there we go. And this is not an FSM intro, but actually what we're doing here is we're kind of wrapping up our game controls and animations. So there's some changes we have to make. Today's a big day in terms of changes because we have to swap over our entire code base from bitmaps to sprites, which is a big issue. And this is where, we've talked about this before. Should we have made a agent or some kind of, actor class, subclass, that's a subclass of the game object superclass that, so we don't have the same things we're doing today. The other thing is, and here's the question I wanted to ask you, do you guys know about entity component systems at all? Did we talk about that?
Do you mean the new one?
I mean any entity component system. Do you know about the design pattern, entity component system? Sorry? Kind of. So the entity component system is like, it's a pattern, a design pattern when it comes to engines, right? So when you make your own engines, like here in web game development, we haven't done that. We haven't made an entity component system. We've kind of based it on, these hierarchical classes, right? And this is okay to some degree. But if we're going to make a large game on the web, it's something more professional, then we want to break this down into an entity component-like system. It's not impossible for us to do that even here in the web. It's just a different design pattern. But basically what it is entities are just IDs, okay? So all they do is keep track of, they actually don't keep track of anything. The components and the entities don't even know about each other, right? At the end of the day. You have a game object in Unity, and each game object has a transform component. Transform component doesn't really know about the game object that contains it. There's just a list of transforms that get updated every frame, right? And so what you have is a transform manager somewhere in the background that's updating every transform in the scene, in your scene graph. So imagine a big scene, and instead of me updating this one, I'm hitting the update function on all these entities, I'm actually not doing that. I'm actually taking each of the transforms, and those are marching along, updating every frame, right? As long as they're inside of an update function, which is interesting. So, and that's really, really cool. Memory management is also a lot of times part of an entity component system, and Unity's already got that built in, right? But here we don't have any of that. We have classes and classical inheritance, right? That we're using we're mimicking classical inheritance with TypeScript. That's what we're really doing here in JavaScript. But really, it's all prototype. Okay, so that one more thing is one suggestion that I had recently was moving away from Create.js and going to P5. Has anyone heard of P5.js? So yeah, if you know processing, right? Processing, however you want to say it, tomato, then their processing is something that is Java based typically. It's used as a quick hit library that includes things like graphics and stuff to create things really quickly. And one of the things they've done in, I have to mention this as well because it's something that maybe one day we'll do that instead of Create.js. It's a little bit more. Hi guys. It's a little bit more lightweight. So if I go to P5.js, if I was to look that up, and I have to mention this only because, hey, they've got some stuff. You got some strength here with processing, right? So again, if you click download, as an example, there's a bunch of stuff you can download. It's cross-platform. It's really cool, and they've got some great documentation. I was reading up the documentation in terms of the way they structure everything. And it's the same thing across P5.js, across things like processing.py, processing for Android, and so on. So that's pretty cool that you can use stuff that's a library that is really just a port on different languages. That's really, really cool for me. So something to watch out for. They've got some really great examples too on P5.js. Yeah.
One of the very important things about P5.js, in my opinion, is that the creator of it, the person who runs the development of this library in general, has a YouTube channel called The Coding Train, and they do very, very frequent uploads on a variety of subjects.
That's cool.
So, for example, they just finished a series on machine learning using processing.
That's good, and that's why I think it's a good ecosystem. The reason why I'm thinking that if we do change stuff, it'll be going towards this direction, is because it's very quick and they got a lot of stuff. Now on the downside, there's a lot of things that have already been done, and you're tapping into an API that's that was more of a framework than what we're doing with Create.js. Okay, so I mean, again, it's just an alternative. But if you click on, which is really neat, some examples, which I'm really, because again, this is web game programming, so we should probably talk about some stuff. They've got some really cool stuff that they've done even with 3D, like for example, geometries. So this is all done in processing or P5, right? That's pretty cool. They can do that. So they don't use 3JS. 3JS is another popular 3D library for in JavaScript. Mr. Doob is the creator of that one. Actually, it's pretty cool. But you can see that right in here. If I want to change some of this functionality, like for example, I want to rotate, let's say I have these objects, and this one here that I'm rotating is the plane. Let's rotate it a little bit more. So you can actually go inside the example code right here, and let's just change some of this code right here, in the program. Let's leave it like that. And if we press run, you can see that you can actually see what it's going to look like right away. So you can check some of these things out, actually do some of these examples, and go through it. And what they have is, which is almost exactly the way I've set it up. They have a setup, start, and they have a draw, update, right? So that, my friends, makes me happy when I see that, because that is in line with what we've seen before. And I think this is pretty good. What they also have is something called a push and pop, where you can push and pop objects onto and off of the display list, which is what they've done. So this happens every frame. So, I mean, and they talk a lot of details. There's a lot of little references here on how to do stuff. They've got books on how to do stuff with P5. There's a lot of support here. It's a big community. So again, it's something that I would consider as a switchover from Create.js, only because of the amount of documentation and the cross-platform support on Java, on different things. So definitely not for this semester, but maybe in the future. But I want to mention it to you, guys, just in case someone asked you about P5, you've heard about it. I think it's a nice library that you guys can hook into at some time in the future. And the things that I'm teaching you are totally applicable with P5. And you can mix and match TypeScript and ES6, although a lot of stuff has been written for ES5. Okay, that's P5. I just wanted to mention that really briefly. Yeah, so what we want to do today is we want to incorporate some new code. One of the things we want to do is we want to add some animations. So this is our lesson 10. Just like we've done before here, before we put this up, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do git remote remove origin. So I want to get rid of that first. This is lesson 10. And then I want to make a new origin remote. But in order for me to do that, I'm also going to need to create a new repo. So I'm going to go to Centennial. And up here, I'm going to make a new repo called COMP397 in the fall 2018 semester and lesson 10, which is going to be the new location for the repo. I'm just going to grab these two lines of code, copy them, go back here and right-click and paste them and enter, and I'm good to go. I've got everything I need for my new repo. So I've moved everything over. I like doing it this way, again, like I talked about, because I keep all my commits. So you can go back into the history of each one of these projects, and you're good to go. All right, so this is pretty cool. Let's try this out and see what happens. So I'm going to press Control-Shift-B to transpile. So I'm going to go into watch mode and transpile this one and see what happens. If there's any errors, shouldn't have any errors. And then I want to go into my PowerShell here, and I want to do something like light-server, which should give me the new version or the latest version of our MailPilot game, which now looks a lot bigger. So here's our MailPilot game. I've kept Pedro's idea of alpha. I'm going to use that for good, Pedro. That's it. And you can see that we've got bullet firing and stuff, for the game. It works pretty good. We fixed a big bug last week that we discovered. These are all good things. Okay, so now it's just polish. I want to be polishing my game, and I'm going to be doing that over the next several weeks until I've got something. So things that are bad. Things that are bad right now are we don't have any kind of explosions. We don't have any kind of cool text. Our text is like, console us. Like it's really ugly, and it's not even centered properly. We don't have a lot of things that we need. And so we're still at the kind of an alpha stage, I would say, with our game. We have one level that has everything together. It's been prototyped so we can see what the clouds look like a bunch of clouds. I have the trappings for maybe 3 levels. If I was to reduce the amount of clouds, go down to 1 cloud, don't add an enemy until 2nd level or 3rd level, whatever, I can start that in, and it'll be more interesting when I go from one, I can transition from one level to the other. I can also make dark levels, like levels at night. I can add things like, light effects and those kind of things to make it more interesting. So lots of work to be done. I mean, I've been doing this only step by step with you guys, but lots of possibilities. Okay, so that's our game so far. But what we need to do now is we want to move into this, change our game controls a little bit. Right now, up until today, we've been really using game controls that are simply, mouse and keyboard. And I really think that that is not the best solution for a game. So I know some of you are using mouse controls for, sorry, not mouse controls, keyboard controls. So let's just go into, just give me 1 second while I pull this up. And we'll go into it. Any questions or concerns? I know this team on the right here, I got to talk to you guys before you leave. Because I know I got a message from you guys. I'm going to go over that with you guys. But let's, it sounds like everyone's got, for the most part, you guys are good. For the most part. At least from what I understand. So. All right, so first things first. I want to build this idea of a keyboard manager, okay? So I've got something of reference. I'm looking at this today because, like I said to Pedro earlier, we have a lot to cover and not a lot of time. So one thing we have inside of my scripts is, I'm going to start doing the keyboard motion first. If you look in my managers, if we look at managers, we have right now bullets, collisions, game, input, and scoreboard. My input right now, all we have is on left mouse button down because that's all we've been using. But I want you to think about this, right? We have a lot of other possibilities here. The way I'm using the input manager is just for left mouse button, right? But what if I made an input manager that also included keyboard controls? So let's keep going with this idea of public static variables here in the input manager. So I could create other public static variables in here, right? For example, public static, I could make a public static variable that is a jump variable, which is also of type Boolean, right? Again, I'm doing this a little bit differently than what I've done in the past, okay? So bear with me when I do this. Okay, so then public static, I'm also going to make, I don't have a jump, but maybe you guys have some platform or whatever you're going to do in the future, a move backward. So some kind of move backward, which is going to be a Boolean again, which is also going to be false. Okay, public static, I'm just building on this input manager class. Move forward class, move forward object, I mean, that is a Boolean. Also false. So all of them start off as false at the beginning. Public static, move left, public static, move right. I've kind of set those up at the beginning. I also have a couple of them that maybe I want to disable my input. So maybe I'm going to have a public static enabled property that's also going to start off by default as true. So everything's enabled by default, right? But I can check and I can control whether I'm enabled or not. Does that make sense? So I think those things I'd want to try and do. I want to have these separate class that I'm using as a container class for something that I'm going to be accessing over and over again across different levels. Okay, other things that I want are I want to set up some stuff for my input. Okay, so typically what I can do with this is if I had a constructor for this, I would set it up in the constructor. So what can I do if I'm using a public static class instead of a constructor? Anyone have an idea? Well, I want to probably initialize somehow. So maybe I want to create a public static class that's called initialize or init, start, my input manager, something, right? And you know, I mean, I've been using a lot of stuff in the past that's different, but I'm going to use the start method for this one. So it's almost like input.start. You know, that's how it'll be, right? And what I want to do with input.start is, which is this function, is I'm going to say that by default, when I start, this dot enabled is equal to true. I'm going to make sure that it starts, right? I'm also going to do something like this. I'm going to say that on the document object, document.add event listener, right? And I'm going to use the key down event, right? And what I'm going to ask is, hey, access this dot on key down. Okay, I don't have that on key down, but I'm also going to use this thing called bind this. This is a different structure than I've used before, and I'm going to talk about it in a second. I'm also going to do the same thing. So I'm going to copy paste here. And I'm going to do this key up stuff, key up, and it's going to be on key up. Find this, right? So I've got like this start method that's going to call these functions, right? And on key down, so on key down, I'm going to call an event, which is a keyboard event, which returns void. And what this is going to do is there's going to be a switch statement that is going to use the event object. And what I'm going to be using is the key code of that event to narrow down which key was pressed, right? So let's talk about this. I could certainly use different keys. For example, maybe the A key is what's the ASCII value of the A key? 65, right? I mean, I could put that down there, but how ugly? I don't know if there's a better way of saying it. How ugly would that be to do, right? I mean, this needs an enumeration, okay? And we don't have one. So, you know, now that I know that I need it, you know, kind of stuff, I'm going to make one. That's what's going to happen. So I'm going to go into my utility or config, and I'm going to create this key config file. And the key config file is going to have all my shortcuts for what those things mean, so I never have to think about it again. Okay? No. You're thinking Unity, buddy. And there's nothing. In Unity, they have a key code, right? But there isn't a key, you know.
There's a key code thing We're using it in our game.
Keycode.key, you mean?
Yeah, that says something like EA. Yes.
Yeah. Is there?
Yes. We use it in our game. So if it didn't exist, we've been doing something.
Under the event? Oh, event.key. And is equal to key dot, like an enumeration? Oh, here you have this, right? You're saying DOM key?
No, it's not an enumeration. It's a.
Oh, yeah. No, I'll do it differently. No. I would do it like this. I would do it differently than that. I see where you're going. No. What I would do is I would make a new file called a key config file, key.ts. And my key.ts would be a module, would be in the config module. And inside the config module, I'm going to export a class called key. And each class of key, these are the keyboard values that I would quickly do. And one of them is going to be a public static key called A, which is a number, which is 65. So I'm going to define all my keys here, so I don't have to think about it. Public static. I'm also going to have other control things like control, which is going to be a number that is 17. Public static, some other things. My D key, which is a number that is equal to 68. And public static, my down arrow, which is a number that's going to be equal to 40. Public static, my escape key, which is the number which is equal to 27. Public static, my left arrow, which is a number which is equal to 37. I'll keep going and I won't talk anymore. You get what I mean? And yes, there are different ways of doing it, but there's a reason why I want to do it this way. Control, my friends, control. I'm doing it. I made a mistake. It's not 16, it's 83. I'll put this up in a second. Bar, space bar. Space bar is one word, yeah? So this basically is all the keys we need. A, control, D, down, escape, left arrow, right arrow, S, shift, spacebar, up arrow, W, and you can put as many other ones as you want, okay? So if you had special things like M for map or whatever, or some other keys, this is how I would probably map it out. And I think I got all the keys right. I'm just looking at my reference, and I think it's all correct. Okay, good. So now the problem with this one is it has to be included in my scripts because it's a new script. So I'm going to go into my my index.html here, and what I'm going to do is include it as a config. And chances are I'm going to put it way at the top here with my config files because one has nothing to do with the other. So config and then key. There's no dependency here for key.js. Okay, now that I've got my key.js, then what I can do is, actually, I'm going to put this up on GitHub so you guys have access to it. Even though I'm not complete with my input manager yet, I'm going to say that added key config, right? And that way you'll have access to it up on GitHub, so you can look there instead of me having to follow me typing. All right, so now that I've got that, I'm happy. It makes me happy that I have that because that is going to be something that I want to improve in the future. And I'm going to go into my managers again and go into my keyboard manager. And in my keyboard manager here, where I have some of this stuff, I want to start using my switch case to do a config.key.up arrow, and that makes sense now. Case config.key.w, right? And that's going to be this dot move forward, right, is equal to true. So I'm basically setting up my true-false cases where I'm able to, it should go here. I'm able to respond to any kind of keyboard directions. I'm just using the key commands instead of me going, hey, my key code is equal to 65. And I know there's other ways of doing that too, but I prefer it this way. Okay, so I want to do a couple more. I want to do key left, key down, key right, key spacebar, and I think that's maybe a pause button. I don't know how we're going to do that. Maybe a pause of some sort. So yeah, so this would be left arrow. So key dot left arrow, and this would be, of course, A, doing the whole WASD thing, and then this would be move left is true. Move left is true, and then this would be key down arrow. Oh, and this would be, of course, the S key, and this move left, move down. I mean, move downward, right? Or move backwards. It'd be move backwards. Move backward is equal to true. It's not really down. And the last one, or the second last one, is right arrow. So again, I have up, left, down, and right arrow would be the D key, and move right is equal to true. These are all good. The this would be the space bar, so key dot space bar, and there would not be another key there because I usually have two, because it's either the arrow keys or the WASD keys. If you want to do one or the other, let's say if two players, then maybe you change these, so player one left, player one right, like that kind of stuff, if you want to use two players. But yeah, this would be this dot jump is equal to true. So jumping is true. So if you were going to make some kind of platformer or something. And just to make sure I'm not missing anything, keys 81. What's key 81, guys? Is that escape? Key code 88, 81. Do we know what that is? ASCII code 81? Let's take a look. ASCII code. Hold on a second, huh? ASCII code.
81 is you.
81? That is weird. So I want to pause the game somehow. I want to pause the game somehow. I'm not sure what character we'd use for that. P for pause? All right. Is it 80?
Yeah.
So we'll say the pause button when it won't use P, which is a number which is equal to 80. Is that what we said?
Wait, but this way, if you name it pause, then we're sort of starting to mix the
Hey, I can name it whatever I want. I told you, this is my control. It's my thing. You want to make yours P? Make yours P, God damn it. All right, I'm joking. Is that better? We'll say it. Usually often used for pause.
Well, I'm only saying it because it's a question of separation of responsibilities. If this is the key class,
all right.
action class.
Okay. All right. This is just the key code. The action is in here. The action is in my input. So now I can say something like case config.key.p, right? Then we can say that this dot maybe enabled or paused. I don't know yet. Kind of stuff is equal to this dot paused, this dot enabled. Let's say, and if it's true, then make it false. It's kind of like a toggle. If it's false, then make it true. That's a ternary operator we're going to use, right? So we check to see what it is. What is it? Is it true or false? And if it's one or the other, just toggle it to the opposite one. So that's kind of a trick. And that's really the key down. So on key down, we do this. We just set up, is it moving or not? And then on the key up event, kind of thing, what we want to do is we want to duplicate this kind of stuff to some degree. Let's just copy this whole thing. And I want to make another one, which is on key up. Now, why do I need key up and key down? Anyone have a clue? Why is that? I need your help, guys, because I can't always answer all your questions. Why? Oh? It'll stay true. Yeah. But I mean, it's a way of keeping track of if I'm pressing the button or not, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. I don't need this. I don't need this one to be. I can just press it once and that's good. But for the most part, yeah, I mean, I don't want to, move the player around without that, okay? Without the ability for me to do stuff. Okay, questions. Now that I have keyboard controls, I want to apply them to my plane, right? I want to move left and right. How could I implement this? Could I make it so that the player moves to the left or right in my plane when I press the keyboards? Do I check it there, or how do you recommend it? What do you think we should do? Anyone? I mean, I've got the controls there. Those are the ways that we would do it, right? So how would I track, right, how the player moves? Should I do it this way, or should I do it inside the plane or the player controls? Should I do it here, or is this just purely input? What do you recommend? I'm going to go back to what Pedro said. Separation of concerns. Should I do it in here, or should I do it in the player? Where should I do it? If I want to physically move the player now.
In the player.
In the player, because the player is the entity that I'm trying to move. These keyboard controls can be used for anything, right? I'm making a generic input manager. That's what I'm doing. So you can use it with any one of your games. By the way, it would work with pretty much Java, C# in different ways, and a bunch of other ones, even in many ways, Unity, right? All right, so this is all this is. Then in my player class, so if I go back to my objects, if I go back to my player, here's my player, and I check his move, right? So in my update, I have this stuff. I have this x is equals to managers.game.stage.mouse x, and that's how I move. That's it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a move method, call it public move for now. We can also change to private later, okay? In my private move, I'm going to say a public move. I'm going to take this out of here and put it in here. And I'm also going to call the move option. So I'm going to say this dot move. Okay, and it's going to update the position, bullet spawn, all that stuff. It's not going to change, all right? But instead of moving with my mouse, I want to disable, for now, my mouse controls and only enable keyboard controls. By the way, this would be a great place to do both. I want to toggle between mouse or keyboard, or I don't know, have an options screen that says, how do you want to move? This way or this way? And I can check to see if one thing is enabled or the other and move. All right, but what about if I wanted to move the player? So what I want to do is something like this. I'm going to set the player's direction. So let direction actually, let's just do it this way. And instead of being the player's direction, I'm going to, I won't do it that way. If I want to do based on direction, I can, like, if I want to move where I want to move, I'm going to put some stuff in here. I'm going to put some comments in here that if I wanted to change my, this dot rotation is equal to a -90. I'm not going to do it right now, though. And we'll explore this a little later, times -1. Okay, and I'll explain that later on. But what I really want to do is if my keyboard itself, which is my, remember I have my controls, my input, right? So managers dot input dot move right. If this is true, right? Now, is there a case for using a case instead of an if? Anyone have a comment about this? Why I'm using if statements and not case? Come on, guys.
If statement instead of a case? Oh, because we want to do everything that applies rather than just one of them per frame.
Case only does one. These ones you can press 2 keys and it will both be active, both trigger, right?
Reason we're not using if else.
That's correct. Managers dot input dot move left, and then this dot x minus equals 5. I'm just using 5. We could use speed. Maybe make a speed variable and then modify it. But for testing, this might be okay too. If this dot move forward, let's move forward. Managers dot input dot move forward. You could also rename that to move up if you're not happy, right? Whatever. It means the same thing in my books. But this dot y minus equals to 5 because you're moving up. Right? By the way, there's no velocity here. Notice I'm not adding a vector. I'm just literally moving up or moving down. And what I want to try and do with this one instead later on is use a vector direction, up, down, left, right, because this makes no sense. And then multiply it by a value, which is better for me. I like that more. Because we have that structure in place. Might as well use it. This dot move, managers dot input dot move backward, right? Then we want to do this dot y and then plus equals to 5. Okay, so that's what this does.
No, this is just saying that like this is just like a working copy of
Okay. Are we good? Is this enough? Is this all I need, Pedro?
Well, for testing this specific part, yes.
I mean, this is just movement. That's all I need, right? I mean, it's clean. You know what I'm saying? It's like very interesting. One thing I don't need this anymore. This direction, if I want to start using direction, I can actually rotate my player by rotating it as opposed to moving left and right. That's a totally different thing. So in other words, if I want to rotate my guy like tank controls, right? Then I wouldn't use this. This is just like literally going right, left, up, down, right? But if I want to rotate, and I want to rotate with direction, then I would take the direction and use things like math.sine, v sine theta, v cos theta to move into different positions. I want to aim and move in a different direction. Like
want to rotate, you have an angular speed, and then you just.
I could do that, but I'm saying, but I literally rotate myself like by, I change my direction, and whatever I'm pointing at, whatever my new direction is, I go that way. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but for this should be good. This is enough. I don't think there's anything that's broken here that would break my game. So let's see if I can make this work. So I'm going to go here to the game, and we have mail pilot, and now no mouse controls. And there's something else that happened. I'm starting over here on the corner, and I don't know, but my controls seem to be locked. I don't have any control at all. Any comments as to what I should check? Well, first thing I would do is, what the heck? Why isn't this working? So let's do this. Well, actually, I know exactly why it's not happening. I've never initialized or started my keyboard manager, right? I never started my input manager. I never said input.start. Never. I've got to do that on my level. And I also should have an input.stop, something that removes my keyboard input so I can type a message, or I don't know, I want to enter my name or do something else, right? So that's one thing that is a problem. So it doesn't give me any errors because, I mean, it's not listening for input right now, right? So that's something to note. So going back to the drawing board, in my input manager, here's my input manager, I have this start event. I should have a stop event, right? So input.stop, public static stop. And I'll say this dot enabled is equal to false, right? And document dot remove event listener key down like this. And the same thing goes with this one. I want to remove my event listeners so I don't keep them going. Actually, should be this and this. The cleanup, right, that I'm doing. So I want to be able to do a stop and a start. So start is what I need, and I'm going to do that inside my scene. So if I go to my scene class, which is actually my scenes play, somewhere in my play scene, I want to be able to start input. So I added my plane, and I want to be able to do the input after that. So this is setup input, and setup input is here. Hey, this would be a great place for my setup input to happen. So I can do my mouse down for firing my weapon. This will still work, right? So I can still use my left mouse button and my keyboard controls to move. And that's pretty standard, actually, right? But let's for now put in a couple things. What I want to do in the beginning is say something like managers.input.start. Okay, so that should start off and bind do my key bindings for my input controls. All right, so let's see if that is totally true or not. Yes, it is. So I can move my key, my thing. It's way harder, like way harder, right? Because now, I mean, I can't move that fast and I will die, right? Does that make sense? Like I'm dead. Like that is like dying. It's like now 3 clouds are death. It's not like how it was before. Before, you know, oh God. Before it was like much easier to play and it was good. Now managing everything at once is way more difficult than it was before. Okay, but now we have keyboard. One thing to note also is my player starts off on the left because I never told my player what his default position should be, which is really 320 pixels in the middle of my screen, right? So that's one thing I should change. And that's in the player class. So in the player class, when I first start off, I don't have an x value, and I need to give it that. So I'll say this dot x then is equal to 320, and these things are hard coded. Again, these are the things that we'd have to go into a config file to change at some point in the future. Same thing with 640 and all that stuff, because it may not make sense. Again, one more test for that, just to make sure that that works. Now my player's in the middle of the screen, and he's going to be moved with mouse or keyboard. Actually, keyboard, arrows. And one thing that he can do is do one of these. Take a look at this now. He can actually move forward now. Look, he's not limited anymore, right? He's not limited anymore. He can actually go up here, look, and way out here, right? Because that's how I enabled his movement that way, right? So if I want my character to move all over the place and even off screen, nothing's going to stop me from moving off screen because I can do one of these, right? So that's a problem. So in my input for my move, I've given input for move right and move left, but I also gave input for move forward and move back. I'm just going to comment these out just in case you wanted to include that in your character. You know, give him, you know, movement. That's how you would do it. Okay, move forward and back. What about if I wanted to give him a direction? So I'm going to say my direction is this, whatever his rotation is, you know, kind of thing. And what if I wanted to move him forward and back in a particular direction? So instead of having it this way, this will be like standard movement control. So standard movement for top scroller. So that's like left and right, right? And these are standard movement for top scroller. Standard, I better put this in like this. Standard movement And this is like up and down, or forward, back, right? So that's what these two things. But what if I wanted not to use these standard movements? Because we have to talk about movement schemes today. And what about if instead I wanted to do something else, like move in the direction I'm aiming? Okay, move in the direction I'm aiming. So how would that look? So it would look like this, actually. I'll just put it down here because I'm going to comment it out later on. So this is move in direction that player is facing. And it would look like if this dot move forward now, not this, managers dot input dot move forward, right? If that's true, then this dot player, this dot x plus equals to 5 multiplied by math dot cos direction multiplied by math dot pi. And again, here's something I want to convert. What I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, convert this to this over and over again. And I want to kind of do this. What I probably want to do is something like radians. So radians, the degrees to radians. So I want to say let deg to rad equal to this, math.pi divided by 180. So, right? Because math, that's what this does. This is math.pi divided by 180. This is what this is going to do is we're going to use times deg to rad. So I don't have to calculate that every time, deg to rad. That make sense? And then what I can do is this, so that's the x-axis, and I'll say this dot y. We also do the y-axis, minus equal to 5 times math dot sine, and then times direction times deg to rad. All right, so this moves the guy forward in the direction that he's going. So why this? Why math cos and math sine? Anyone? Linear algebra. We're using trigonometry to basically, when I turn, I move in that direction. When I turn left, I move in this direction, right? But it's moving forward. Moving forward means up. Okay? So that's what this does. And let's just do the same thing with move back. So what about if it's move back? So move backward. I'm trying to give you all the schemes so that way you don't have to figure it out yourself. I've already figured it out. So, to some degree, I don't want you to worry too much. Math.sine. I believe it's flipped. No, I was right. Math.cos. Math.cos direction minus equal to 5. And this is plus equal to 5 because you're turning the other way. All right, so that is forward and back. All right. So what does this do? Let's see what it does. So play the game. Okay. So, I mean, that's not exactly what I wanted, but what it does is it, it allows me to, it changed my character, that's for sure. That's not what I really wanted to do, but. So it doesn't allow me to do any kind of motion left or right. That doesn't allow me. I can still fire to my left. I don't know how that works, but that's a kind of a weird thing. So that's not exactly what I was looking for. Yeah. Right. And of course, I want to put move right and move left, right? The only thing is that the direction of the player, the direction of the player is something that I need to know. So I want to correct the direction. So that's what I did that. I didn't want to make the direction a certain thing. I want to say, well, what's your direction? So if I'm pointing up, what is my direction? Does anyone know? Like in math? This is wrong, by the way. So if I want to have some kind of angle of attack, right, then if I move up, if you think about it, right, that is 90 degrees. So to the right is 0, or east. If I look at cardinal directions, east or right is 0, up is 90, left is 180, down is 270, and that's the kind of directions, all right, typically. So whatever my direction is, if I'm facing up by default, whatever that direction is my rotation. So if my rotation is equal to, that's the problem. I have an equals in here. If my direction is if my rotation is 0, right, then what I want to do is I want to subtract 90 from it, right? So 0 minus 90, okay, whatever that is, and then multiply by -1, so flip it to the other side, so that this is 0 and this is up. If I don't do that, then I'll have a real funky way of moving. Let's try that again. Right, so I can move forward and back. That's what this is doing. Okay, that one, that's all this does, move my plane forward and back. Okay, because my direction hasn't changed. Okay, how about move right and left? So really what I'm doing is I'm rotating here. I want to somehow rotate you know, to the right and left when I press the buttons. So how do I do that? Right? Well, it's not difficult. I mean, I literally have to just, you know, rotate to whichever direction I want. Okay? So what about if we made the buttons, when I kind of push my buttons left and right, I rotate my plane to the left and right a certain number of degrees. I'm just saying. And again, I'm just putting in this just to give you some kind of control schemes, right? Not because I'm going to use this in the game. I'm not going to use it in my game. Okay, I'll say if managers.input move left, and again, it's more like a rotate left. Then this dot rotation, right? Let's say is minus equal to 5. Okay, and let's suppose that if managers.input.move right, then this dot rotation, you know, as an example, plus equals to 5. Okay, so that's left and right rotation. Let's try that out and see if that works. So, see, I can move around like this, do around the thing here based on simple controls. Sense? So this way it allows me to move in whatever direction I want. It's kind of a weird control scheme, but makes sense? Right? So wherever my plane is facing, that's the way I'm going, right? And I can rotate with my left and right button. I don't know. The problem is firing. I didn't make it so it fires in the direction I'm looking, and that's another thing altogether. Like I'd have to look at the direction of the player. The player would have its own direction. That's part of the player class. And then I would know, depending on the direction I'm firing, where the bullet's going to go. We have a direction for the bullet only up and down, right? Those are the two directions we've stated. We'd have to change our bullet so it can go in any direction, which we haven't done yet, okay? So I wanted to show you this kind of stuff. I'm just going to comment this part out, but I wanted to give it to you just in case you wanted to see it. Like, you know, what if you had some weird direction movement? That's how it would be. But what we want to use is our standard movement for left and right, just this part. I've commented out the movement just in case you want to do other things, but that's our standard movement. Okay, so let's just make sure we test it, and if everything works, then I'm just going to use this for stuff. Now it's pretty responsive, you know. I don't think there's a big problem with it. My only issue with this kind of movement is it's pretty static too. Plus equals to 5. What it should really be is my x is equal to a new direction, kind of thing, multiplied by some kind of velocity. And what I want to do is I want to have a velocity to move to the right and left, as opposed to I'm physically repositioning myself, which is what I'm doing here. I'm positioning myself right or positioning myself left. I'm not giving myself a push to go right or a push to go left, okay? And if I did that, then I could lerp, linear interpolate between where I am and where I'm going, and to create a smooth motion right and left when I move, right? But those are tweaks that we can do another time. Movement works now. So because of that, I'm going to go here and I'm going to say that added input control or keyboard control to input manager. Keyboard control to input manager. That's your update for keyboards. What about Gamepad? Because some of you are making different kinds of controls for the Gamepad. Well, I want to do some prep. If we're going to do Gamepad stuff, then you know what? I need some more configurations. Okay. It's not a big configuration thing that I want to do with my Gamepad. It's actually quite simple, but I want to make it so that, again, it seems to make sense from a a scheme perspective. And I'll show you this in a second. I'm going to call this gamepad.ts. This is in the config section. So for my Gamepad, I want to define a module, again, config. In my module config, I want to make a new enumeration. This is something different I can do. And I've done this before. My enumeration is going to be called Gamepad, right? And my Gamepad is going to have horizontal, vertical, and rotation. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do on my Gamepad. I'm going to put this configuration in this enumeration. This is 0, vertical is 1, and rotation is 2. That's what it means. Okay, it's just an enumeration for understanding what I'm doing with my Gamepad. Okay. And again, just like I did before, I'm going to go back into my input manager or my index.html, and in the top here, I'm just going to do a new script that basically says scripts config, and it's going to be Gamepad. There we go. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to say that that's part of my Gamepad. In my managers now, I want to put a Gamepad, another manager. It's a type of input. Okay, it's a type of input. So theoretically, I could put it part of my input manager. I'm just saying, this is like an option. Okay, I could, I could do that. I can put it, part of my input manager, and it wouldn't be that bad. Okay. However, there are some special things inside of my Gamepad, especially if I have more than one Gamepad, that might make it more challenging. So I think in this case, I won't make it part of my input manager for today. What I'm going to probably do is make a separate manager called Gamepad. Right. So a new file for now called Gamepad. TS. And so the Gamepad is going to be in module managers. And a Gamepad is like an Xbox controller, a PS4 controller, whatever. You can do a lot of different things. We're going to export a new class here called Gamepad. And my Gamepad class is going to have some private instance variables, maybe some public properties, maybe some constructor, maybe some public and private methods, well, so I don't know. Let's say private methods and public methods. There we go. Okay, so I've got them all the different things. So in my instance variables, the way it works with the Gamepad is I can define a a couple of things. One is the actual gamepad itself, which represents the an object. Okay, so I can say something like this: private underscore gamepad. So a gamepad, not the gamepad, which is of type gamepad. Gamepad is actually part of the HTML5 reference. It's not something I'm making up. It's actually, it kind of exists in some ways. But it's not called gamepad. It's called something else. And I also want to make a gamepad index of type number. So I want those two things. I want a couple of other objects, okay, that I want to have access to. And I want to include something called direction, right, which is a number. And I also want an array called axis, the axes, if you will, which is a number array. That's what I want. And that's really it. I also want to have access to those things, you know, reference to those things outside of this, if this makes sense. So I want to create some public properties. So I'm going to make some getters and setters. So I'm going to say, I want to be able to get my direction and set my direction. So I'll say get direction, right? And the direction is going to return a number, almost like and it's going to return this underscore direction. So that's what that's going to do. I'm also going to be able to set my direction with new direction, which is going to be a number. And I'm going to, for now, I'm going to say this dot underscore direction is equal to new direction. That's kind of the direction public property. I'm also going to do the same thing for axes. I want to have access to I want to have access to return the array itself, or for now, and then I might change that later on. So I want to say get axis, and it's going to return a array of type number. And I'm going to return this dot underscore axis, a reference to the axis array. That's what's happening here. I'm also going to set axis, just in case, a new axis array. I'm also going to set axis, just in case, number array. I want to reset it for some reason or another. And I'll say this dot underscore axis is equal to new axis array. That's what that does. So I've got my getters and setters here for my public property. In my constructor, there's actually going to be a constructor. What I'm going to say is I want access to a gamepad index. So gamepad index, which is going to be a number. And I'm going to say that this dot axis is equal to a new array of type number. Okay. Oh, I hate when it does that. Autocomplete. This sets up a new array, a new empty container. So new array of type number. Okay. And I'm going to say that this direction is equal to 0. So by default, my direction is 0. Okay. And I'm going to say that this dot underscore gamepad. Gamepad index. Yeah, I could do that. This gamepad index is equal to gamepad index, whatever the gamepad index that I'm using. Okay, so a couple of things for the constructor for now. All right, good. And then what I want to do is I want to have a public method. And here's where it gets funky. A public method that's get input, returns void. And it works like this. I'll say this dot underscore gamepad, so the gamepad itself, is equal to a window dot navigator dot get gamepads, and I want to base on this gamepad index, this dot underscore gamepad index. Okay, I'm going to explain this in a second here. So what I'm saying is, hey, get input from the input, the gamepad that I'm listening for, right? That's what this get input does. And the navigator object of the window object is it actually accepts any input from any gamepads that you've plugged in that are registered on the system. Okay. So then I'm going to check to see if it exists. I'm going to say if this dot gamepad, if that does exist, right? Then what I want to do is I want to say check buttons. That's the first thing I want to do. It's like, so okay, so I have a gamepad. It's in play. So for every button, right, kind of thing, where the button is less than this dot underscore gamepad dot buttons dot length, right? Then I want to go to the next button. What this does, it says, hey, check each of the buttons, starting at button 0. Okay? And again, I guess I could have done a for each loop here too. If this dot underscore gamepad dot buttons button, so the button that I'm checking right now is pressed. If that button is pressed, then let's do a console log for now. That the button that is being pressed, I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, is my button plus. I probably could have done a template string here instead, but here. Okay. So this does is whatever button is pressed, like show me on the game on the screen that which one I'm pressing. Okay. So that's how you check your buttons. You check your buttons through, like literally pressing the button and then saying so cycling through each of the buttons that you're checking for that particular gamepad and checking to see if the button's pressed. Okay, and the other one is if I want to check axes. So how does this work? So here's my check axes. So for let index of the axes be equal to 0, and again, this is where we could be more creative. Less this dot underscore gamepad dot axes dot length, how many axes there are, index plus plus. A little bit of inconsistency here in the code I don't like. If this dot underscore gamepad dot axes, right? And I don't know that I want to use this, but let me just continue. Index is greater than 0.2. So this is my dead zone. I'm saying like if it's greater than 0.2 or this dot underscore gamepad dot axes index is less than, you have to kind of test for this, guys. I'm sorry, but this will work for me when I was first trying this out. So you may have a different sensitivity that you want to have for your gamepad. This dot axis capital A index, right? As an example, is equal to this dot underscore gamepad dot axes index. So what I'm saying is, okay, so I want to set the index of that axis in my axes array, right, to whatever I want, whatever that I'm selecting. If I'm pressing that particular axis, right, I'm updating the axis on my axis array from the gamepad that I've selected. Okay. So that's what does it there. That's kind of basically what that does is says, hey, depending on the axes, I want to, set the axis on my controller. All right, that's if this is this, but what about if the axis is different, right? So else if, this is weird, this dot underscore gamepad axis, gamepad dot axes index is greater than negative 0.2, right? And this dot gamepad dot axes index, what about if that happens? Is less than 0.2. So between those two things, then that's a different sensitivity, different kind of axis that I'm using. Then this dot axis index, as an example, is equal to 0. So what does that? What does this do? What do you think it does? I'm gonna go back to our friends at table number 1 over here, Wesley, Pedro, and Sergio. What do you think it does? I'll check my axes. I get a number.
It's in that zone.
Okay, from 0.2 to negative 0.2, and then what about if it's something else? Then I set it to 0. What does that mean?
Yeah, the second condition is a dead zone. It means that if you're moving the gamepad
Beyond that, it doesn't matter. It goes to 0, or I go back. It goes back. It's 0.
Little, take it as none.
Yeah, and this is the dead zone, right? Dead zone, and that's how the gamepads would function. And one thing to note is that this one here, and I don't frequently like to do this kind of stuff, but this is the check axes function, right? So this is end check axes. I want to just put this in here for you so you can see this. So for each of the axes that I'm checking, and this one is, hey, does the controller exist, right? And check, yeah, I'm just putting it to if gamepad is connected. That's what this does. That's what this does right here, like this little loop. Is the gamepad connected, right? Is the gamepad connected? If it's not, then don't check buttons or axes, right? That's what it's doing, right? All right, so that's really this get input function, which is kind of a central function to this whole thing. So now, I want to move the player, and I want to move the player with my gamepad as opposed to my other stuff. So first, before we even get there, right, I have to enable the player itself, the gamepad, somehow to update. Like I want to be able to update the gamepad, all the stuff. Now, I've put it here, but is there something that you guys can see that I can incorporate this stuff? This is the old code that I had, all right? Can I incorporate this stuff in my input manager somehow?
Yes.
I mean, it's pretty separate. One thing I have is direction. Remember we talked about this. Direction right now is absolutely useless. I put it in there, but direction could be more of a player direction. So I don't even see that this is relevant right now in my input, right? I mean, really, I'm not doing anything that requires an input whatsoever. So this is the old code that I wanted to kind of show you guys. The other one is that I have axis, which is okay. So that's the one reference, which is a getter and setter. But really what I could do here is I would just make it a public static, object that's called axis that I reference if I really wanted to do that. I mean, the constructor, I'm getting a gamepad, so I can set up multiple gamepads, that kind of stuff. That's what I'm doing with the constructor. And I make an array of axis. I set up the axis array here, and my player direction is 0. So to east, right? Then I say that whatever the gamepad index is for my constructor, when I set up my gamepad, I check that one to see if it's in action, right? So I set up multiple gamepads depending on whatever the gamepad index. I'm checking only that one to see if it's alive. So I set up each gamepad separately, gamepad 0, gamepad 1, and so on. If that makes sense. And then what I want to do is I want to get input every frame. I want to be able to get input for the gamepad that I'm setting up, right? So, I mean, I guess I could make this as part of my input manager where a number of gamepads are in play in the game. So in my input manager itself would call the gamepad class, right? And I could share some of this stuff because at the end of the day, what I'm really doing is I want to move forward, move back, move right, move left, turn, do all those kind of things that I'm doing in here anyway. Okay. But get input is something that I want to check on a regular basis. This get input thing that I want to do. All right. Direction, not so much. In fact, I feel like taking it out because it's just, it doesn't make any sense for our little gamepad. So let's take this out completely. All I want to do right now is check to see that I get some access. So I think I may have a gamepad that I can use that's here. I brought one in today. Here's my little Xbox One X controller, right? And I'm going to plug it in. All right, so that's we got to test it. We can't just make a gamepad controller without testing it, for God's sake, right? Okay, there it is. It's connected. But now, now that I've got it connected to my machine, I need to call the Gamepad Manager somewhere. Like I got to make a class called Gamepad Manager, and I've also got to include my gamepad.ts and the managers inside my index.html. So let's do that first. So in my index.html, and it's 6:23 already, and I still got to do animations. It's the way we roll, man. So I got this under config, but I need to do managers for input. I'm going to make it just above the input because I might use it in my input manager later. Maybe not now. The scripts, managers, and then game.js. It's going to be called actually gamepad.js. There it is. Okay, so that's my gamepad. And what I want to do is inside my scene class, my play scene, I need to enable a new type of object called a new game manager called, I'll say private underscore gamepad manager is of type managers dot gamepad. Gamepad. So that's my gamepad manager. And what I'm going to do with it is once I establish this in my start method, just like I did for my bullet manager where I put it down in here, I'm going to set it up so that this dot underscore dot gamepad manager is equal to a new managers dot gamepad for now. And also in my game manager class, which is going to be in managers.game, I know that chances are I'm going to need access to that gamepad manager later on. So I'm going to make it a public static. That's why I'm saying we're going to call it gamepad manager, managers.gamepad. There we go. Yeah. So, yeah. Why is this going to be a problem? Oh, I need a reference for 0. So I want to set up gamepad 0, and I'm going to say something like gamepad manager managers.game.gamepad manager is equal to this dot underscore gamepad manager. You're going to see that there's a problem here, but we're going to correct it later. Okay, so yay. Wonderful, right? We got it enabled, and once we enable it, we have control. And as soon as I connect, I should see this thing that says your gamepad 0 is connected. Let's try this out. So go back. I go here and inspect, and I'm going to go to console, and when I click start, I got nothing, right? Because I mean, don't have anything that says I'm started in any way, you know, kind of thing, and there's no detection for what's happening. All right, so that's number one. Two, if I go back to Gamepad Manager, it says that I set up my axes. I make an array of that, but I need to get input from my Gamepad Manager every frame. So I need to go back to play for now. And inside my update function, I didn't make an update function from Gamepad Manager, but I don't know, somewhere at the top, maybe before my updates for my player, I'm going to say is that this dot underscore Gamepad Manager dot get input. And that should solidify what I'm trying to do. So there, and yeah. So why am I not getting any input? So manager.gamepad.getInput. So back to here, Gamepad, and getInput basically does this, right? And it says if this is true, then it's there, it's connected. But end if the Gamepad is not connected. That's what this does. So what's going on? How come it's not working? Well, let's test. Let's see if we're getting access. So what if else? We'll say that's the Gamepad not connected thing. So this is the Gamepad not connected. If it is connected, then we want to say Gamepad not connected. So Gamepad console.log Gamepad not connected. Okay, so this is, again, we're getting input every frame. What we're doing is we're checking to see if the gamepads exist by checking the Gamepad Index, that specific one. Okay? Whatever. I'm only checking for index 0, right? By the way, this may not be the right thing to do, right? And then if this Gamepad is true, then that's good. I should put something like Gamepad is connected. Gamepad is connected. There we go. All right, so boom, Gamepad is connected. Look, right? And if I unplug it, and if I go back, Gamepad is not connected. Take a look. And if I plug it in, this is a good thing, good sign, guys, right? If I plug it in, then we should see that the Gamepad eventually is connected when I restart the game. There it is, right? So I know the Gamepad is connected. All right, how about buttons? Here's my buttons. So if I press the buttons on my Gamepad, right? So I press my buttons on my Gamepad button 0. As an example, I can see that my Gamepad button 0 is pressed. So that is my A key. So my Gamepad button 0, that's the A key. Button 2 is the X key. Button 1 is the B key. And it looks like button 3 is the Y key. And there's other buttons. The 5 is my right bumper. The 4 is my left bumper. The 7 is my right trigger. And the 6 is my left trigger, right? And if I press into the left stick, the left stick when I press down, that's my button 10. And if I press down on my right trigger, that is button 11. And let's see if my D-pad works. My D-pad is button 14 for left, button 15 for right, button 12, and button 13. So those are all the buttons. I also have the start button and the menu button, all right, on the keypad. So all the keybar controls work, every one of them. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so this is good. So all my keypad works. This is good. And that's what all the buttons are. If the buttons are pressed, I can do something. And you know what I want to do when I can check to see if my button is pressed, the A button or my trigger or whatever, and then I don't need my mouse for firing. I can use my trigger for doing that. Okay? So instead of my input, that's why this belongs in an input manager, not how it is written right here. Okay. Okay, but how about axis of movement? That's what this is doing right here, right? So whatever the axis is, if it's one way or the other, how does this work, right? So if I want forward or back movement, forward and back movement, or left and right movement, I would check my config.gamepad vertical or config.gamepad horizontal, right? If the left or right movement is that way, right, then I want to check it. And the way to check that is this. If the right player, my one movement or the other is checked. So I can check the axis, right? So let's make a small little thing here. So I'll say if, and this is based on config.gamepad vertical. Let's do right and left. So we'll do horizontal. So if the index, is equal to config.gamepad.horizontal, right? If it's the horizontal thing moving, then I want to say console.log, now, which is the horizontal axis? This is the left stick, right? The left stick, left and right, yeah? Left stick, left and right. That's what that is. I don't know which one it's going to be if I do this, but that's the other one. And the other one is, what about if my index is equal to config.gamepad.vertical? And that is console.log left stick up and down. That make sense? So let's see if that works. So go back to my scene, and I'm going to go to here, and we're going to start, and I press it up. I get left step up and down, and I press it down, up and down. If I press left, left and right, right, left and right, and I have that movement. It detects those movements here. So now, if I have those in my gamepad, I have everything I need to make myself move with my gamepad and fire with my trigger, right? Does that make sense? Do you need more, or should I make it work? So here's the challenge now. The challenge is I've got it all in this little class, Gamepad, right? And I'm really only ever checking my one gamepad for now. I mean, how many? You want to have two gamepads? Then you would do two, right? For two, so each gamepad would have its own axes, right? That's the thing. You would have to, check that. And it's going to return stuff. Getting input from the gamepad is one thing, right? But it's like I need to set it up so that, I mean, this is very raw, right? I don't care about gamepad connected anymore. I can get rid of that. I know I've tested that. I know that's true. And I know this works, this not connected stuff. So I know my gamepad is working. So I can trim a little bit.
One of the ways that you could do this is you could check for the presence of connected gamepads and instantiate gamepad objects for each one.
I could. The problem is it doesn't work that way with the navigator. It's not real time, right? This thing here, this get input, the only time it adds a gamepad or whatever is because, remember, I'm checking every frame. This has to be on every frame for it to work, right? Otherwise, I don't know which one I'm talking about, right? And I got to check specifically for which one I'm looking at. Gamepad 0, Gamepad 1, Gamepad 2. I could look at the window.navigator and see what connected gamepads exist. Get gamepads by itself, this part. This part right here returns an array, right, of gamepads that are connected. That's what it does. That's just built into the windowing system, okay? So I could do what you're saying, okay? Check it yourself if you don't believe me. But the challenge is, so this is the getting input part. And whichever, for every gamepad, I want to be able to do something, right? So this is where this stuff is not enough. The way I've set it up here. I'd want to set it up so that the buttons are mapped. I have a map button for, I can check to see if my gamepad left is being pressed, and I can call this gamepad 1, 0, right? Gamepad 2, 1, right? And gamepad 1, I would set up both gamepad 1 and gamepad 2 if it's connected, if gamepad 2 is connected, but I'm going to instantiate both so you can have 2 players. I mean, that's something that I could do. So 2-player plays. If both are connected, then you can move. If only one is connected, In this case, what I'm going to do is in my input manager, I can set up another gamepad. So I can do something like, because my gamepad comes next, right? So I could do something like this: public static gamepad. I'll make it just one gamepad is equal to a type managers gamepad. We'll call it the one gamepad, and we can call this gamepad 1 if you really want to, right? For now. Okay, that's what this is. And then what I'm going to do is on start, not only am I going to hit the key down and key up stuff, because I want to start this input manager like this, but I'm also going to set up my my gamepad. So I'm going to say something like, okay, call my, kind of set up my gamepad for the first time. So because here in my gamepad, I've got, I start off with stuff, right? So on start, I want to instantiate a new object of type gamepad. So I'm going to say, so gamepad 1, so this dot gamepad 1 is equal to a new managers dot gamepad, and pass in the first one. So this is for the first gamepad as an example. Okay, so now that I have this, every frame I need to check my input for my gamepad, but it's here in my input manager, right? It's in my input manager. That means that in my game manager, I don't have to do this, because that doesn't make any sense. But in my in my input manager, I can check. I have a gamepad now, a gamepad object that's public static, gamepad 1. So input managers.input.gamepad 1 dot, and then I have access to that stuff, right? Okay, so if that's the case, then in my gamepad, I need to have additional properties, not just the axis for my gamepad, but also a buttons array. I need a buttons array of some kind, right? Where I have gamepad buttons, which is the gamepad that I'm accessing, right? And I have gamepad axes, right? Which is what I did earlier. So I need to set something up like another array. I'm going to say private buttons number array. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did with axes. So I'm going to call this these buttons. Okay. Buttons. Buttons. Okay, so that's the buttons array. So the buttons array, what it does is it keeps track of all my buttons, just like I did this one. Right? So just like I did the axes where I said this, right? Now the button is the same. So for every button in buttons, that's what this is doing. I'll check to see if the button is pressed, whatever the current button is, and do something. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to say that this dot axes, or this dot buttons index button is equal to the button that's pressed, which is this dot underscore gamepad dot buttons, and then button. Why did it not like that? Gamepad button. This is why. type gamepad button, which is a button, is not equal to, okay, so sorry. So this is not a number array, it's a gamepad button array. Gamepad button array, there we go. So new array of dot buttons, this is a gamepad button. And the same thing, gamepad button array. Okay, so there's a gamepad button array. Good, so now I return all my buttons. And I can check to see if this button is pressed, right? So if this button is pressed, right? And this is happening on get input. Every frame, it's setting up the buttons that are being pressed. That's what's happening here, right? And what I can do is I can check if every frame, if the button was pressed, right? Whatever that button one is pressed. So I can check to see which button it is. So if we want the fire button, right? If you want the fire button, then we can check to see if the fire button was pressed in the player object, right? So this is another move for the player. I can see that the button was pressed, so the move was drawn. So this is standard movement for top scroller, left and right. And instead of doing it this way, what I can do is I can say, if my managers.input axis is equal to this, then move the thing right and move the thing left, right? So axes is down here. If my config gamepad, I have to check if my whatever my config axes is. So if my axes.index if that's true, if it's true, because it just basically sets up a true or false, right? If I'm not wrong. This does gamepad number, a number array, and this does a number. So that's what this does. It says if the index is this, right? If it's true, and because it's going through this, then the number would equal to this gamepad axis every single frame. And it's almost like I need the axis, this axis itself, not to be a number, but to be a Boolean, a true false. You know what I'm saying? So I can see if the axis is being pressed or not, or it's on that axis. So this is checks for the index, right? That's what it is. So going back up to the drawing board, I want an array of not numbers, but rather an array of Booleans. So let's make this Boolean. Same thing with this. Boolean. And in here, where I say a new array of Booleans, not of numbers, and I'll do the same thing with my buttons. My buttons should be on or off, right? And the same thing goes with that. So I'll say this dot buttons is equal to a new array of Booleans. I can actually type properly today, any way possible, in any possible form. Right, so there's the array of Booleans. And of course, buttons has to be, instead of gamepad buttons, it's just going to be Booleans. We're not going to set the thing to gamepad buttons. We're going to make it so it's Boolean, a Boolean array. I can actually do this right. Okay, good. So I've got two Boolean arrays for buttons and axis. And I'm going to say that, okay, this is the change. So I'm going to say that, okay, if my button 0 is less than this done gamepad button's length, then what I want to say is that then my buttons button is equal to true. Right? So that button will be turned on. And just for inconsistencies, this drives me crazy. I'm just going to modify this so it says index. So rename symbol to index because it just drives me nuts to see that. Okay, so just a minor change. Yeah, so I'm going to say, so if my button index is true, whatever that button is that I'm cycling through, then I'm just going to say that that button is true, right? Okay, and if it's false, right? No, that's not here. If that's going to be here. If my gamepad button's index is pressed, then this index is true. Otherwise, else I'm going to turn it off and make it false. So that's what I'm going to say is false. So it's false or true. I need to know what button is pressed right now because I don't know which one it is. But I'll take that off too, and I'll create some configs for that. Okay, and then from a check axis perspective, it'll be the same thing. So I'll say this axis is true. Now, okay, so this is where it gets funky. I don't know if it's up or down, in this case, left or right, right? So this is the dead zone, right? But I don't know in this case what the thing is. This is just checking that I'm moving my stick around, right? This doesn't tell me if the stick is up or the stick is down. So my guess is that a positive movement, so greater than 0.2, right, is up, and a negative movement, lower than negative 0.2 is down. Okay, so again, I want to say that this is the case only if my gamepad axis is in the zone. Otherwise, my gamepad axis is not in the zone, it's false. Right? The dead zone. And then I got to check to see which one it is, if it's horizontal or vertical. If this index is horizontal or vertical. So I can check to see if my index, depending on what the index is. And I believe I really don't care about this. I don't care if it's horizontal or vertical. I really don't care. I'll use this. This is just if my index is up or down. Any index or up or down will turn on or off. So this is absolutely irrelevant at this point. This doesn't really do anything. Okay, so that fixes my gamepad. That's what that does. My gamepad now gives me some kind of input for buttons, and if my axis is true or not. And I'm just going to print out this console log for the axis number, console log axis, and then plus index, whatever that axis index is. So then I'll know which one it is, up or down. Okay, so in my input manager, it instantiates, just to make sure, it instantiates a new object of type input. And then what I need to do is I need to poll every frame for my gamepad.getInput. That's what I need to do, gamepad1. So input managers.input.gamepad1.getInput as an example. And that's strange. I called it getInput, but really what I want to talk about is update. So I want to kind of change this getInput method. I want to rename the symbol to update. That's what I'm doing. I'm updating my gamepad every frame. Every time I loop, I'm going to update my gamepad. I'm going to get access. I'm going to get buttons. And I'm going to return these things every frame. And why is that giving me an issue? Buttons, buttons. Sorry, guys. I want to make sure. New buttons array. So it does axes, but never buttons. Why is this grayed out? Grayed out is bad. Grayed out is very bad. New buttons equals a new array of button Boolean. Okay. Guess what this does? Cool. Gamepad, this buttons, dot index, this axis. Why is it grayed out? This bugged me. Look. That really bugs me. Anyways, we'll find out, won't we? I don't know why that's like that. That shouldn't be grayed out. It should be like this.
Value is never read.
Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to see why that is, because look, I do this. Set.
Oh, in the getter, wouldn't it be return this dot underscore?
That's what I wanted. Thank you. Like I said, we'll find out soon enough, won't we? All right. Okay, and then this won't be Gamepad Manager, so I won't do this Gamepad Manager anymore, because this doesn't make any sense. I already have an Input Manager, and my Input Manager is live already, because that's what sets up all the input, which is here, managers.input.start, right? So that gets set up here, and then it triggers my update where I say something like managers input.gamepad1.update. I just called the gamepad 1, but later on we can have multiple gamepads or whatever. And this should work. Let's see if that doesn't completely crash. All right. All right, so yeah, so I have, so axis 0 seems to be right, and axis right or left is axis 0. All right, this is left. Axis 1 is up and down. All right, that's what this does. So it reads that. And the right stick is axis 2 and 3. Guess what that does? So 0 and 1 is what I want. I don't care about that. Buttons, this is my 7 button. Do you guys want to press, I think you might not be comfortable to press the trigger. It might be better to press the A key, the A button. What do you think for this one, for Mail Pilot? A key?
Yes, definitely A key.
A key and then left stick, right? So A key would be button 0. So button 0 and then axis 1 is, no, axis 1 is up and down. Axis 0 is left and right. Yeah, axis 0 is left and up, 0 is left and right, 1 is up and down. Man, just how it goes, my friends. Okay, so let's undo some of these consoles because they just drive me crazy. So I'm really listening for axis 1. That's what I'm listening for, 0 and 1, and button 0. So let's put button 0 in there. So I'm going to say that we want to, my player, the way the player works right now, is if it's 0 or 1, right, it's going to give me a dead zone. Wait a minute. So this gives me 0 and 1. And fig dot, if the index is horizontal or vertical. Horizontal or vertical. And then depending on if the gamepad axis index okay, I need one more out. Well, I need one more out because this is not going to give me the information that I need. This is only going to give me, but the buttons are going to work. The buttons 0 and 1, that's true and false. But this is going to tell me the axis, but not going to tell me the value, the axis value, which is what I really need, right? So if this is true, good, excellent. But now I need if it's positive or negative, right? If the axis is positive or negative. And the only way to do that is to release Gamepad into the wild. So Gamepad is almost like the Gamepad, right? Itself. The Gamepad itself. So it's almost like stick. I want to really know the stick that I want. So if stick 0, right, and stick 1, stick 0 and stick 1. So stick left stick, right stick, left stick positive, left stick negative, you know, kind of thing. And how do I know that? So that's going to be a bit of trickiness. But I also want to know the buttons. So let's do the buttons first. So how do I fire when I trigger stuff? So that's in my play. In my play scene, what I do is I check to see if my on left mouse button down is triggered, right? Well, I know that this is happening now because I know what my manager, what's happening when I press the button. So bullet manager for each bullet. And I think I have that in my input manager, which is here on left mouse button down. I'm firing the bullet. So every time I press this button, or if I do the other thing, I'm firing the bullet. Okay. So I'm going to say managers.game.bulletmanager.fireBullet when the bullet 0 is being triggered. So I'll do that in my play scene. So my play scene, I'm going to do in my update. So, okay, so when this updates, I'm going to say that if managers.input.gamepad1.buttons 0, or if that's true, then managers.bullet.fireBullet. What is it? Managers.game.bulletmanager. Managers.game.bulletmanager.fireBullet. With the intention of it being this vector up. It's actually, in fact, I can just take this whole line and put that in there. Okay, let's check the firing bullet, Pedro. This is for you. So A button, A button, A button, A button, A button, A button.
That's perfect. That's exactly how shoot 'em ups work.
Just saying. A button, A button, A button, A button, A button, A. Well, the reason why this is the way it is because in my input manager, I on left mouse button down, that works, but on left mouse button down is being checked. How do I limit the bullets? That's really bizarre. See how many came out? That shouldn't work. That shouldn't happen, actually.
Shouldn't it?
No.
Do we have anything in place to stop it?
Yes. Go to definition. Start fire bullet. So here's fire bullet. And where do I limit the frames? I limit the frames somewhere.
You limited like outside of like calling fire. So
I think it was in the previous firing code.
No, because otherwise I would be able to fire as many as I wanted. Like, oh, I know why. Because I know why. Because the it was the left mouse button, and I can't click it that fast. I can't hold it down. I can hold it down here. I can't hold the left mouse button down. This holds down.
Also, the event for that being pressed fires every frame.
That's right, and this doesn't. So, oh, sorry, the left mouse button doesn't. So what I need to do is in here, I'm going to say if my button is this and the time, which is going to be get ticks, right? create.js.ticker.getTicks % 10
Everything
is equal to 0.
Okay, is it tick
Frames.
equivalent to a frame?
Yeah.
Then
So if I did this, what's that?
then it's actually slightly too slow.
Too slow?
Oh, well, I'm talking about
How many do you want? What, how many frames?
3. Yes. Yeah, that looks perfect. That looks exactly like Toho.
You want that?
Yeah, that's how the shoot 'em up games do it.
Okay, let's make it 10 for my little slow game. Okay, really slow.
Maybe like 5.
That looks
That's
good.
a little.
Maybe it's too slow. Yeah, maybe 5. Maybe 5 frames.
That might still be too fast.
Let's see.
Yeah, it looks good. Or you could have it so that you have to let go and you have to mash it. It's not as good for people who have pain in their hands with
Yeah, it's too fast.
this.
You guys are crazy, man. Crazy. Let's do it so it's like 7.
Yeah, 7 times.
Okay. So it's a firing rate. Now, the next thing is, this is the update on this, but I need to get the update on moving. And the problem with the update on moving is more challenging. Because my input for my gamepad, it only gives me, yeah, my axis is being triggered. I don't know which one, but I know that it's my 0 and 1 axis. That's what's being triggered. It's Boolean. It's on or off, right? So I can check to see that that's happening. But then I got to check to see what the value of the axis is. The value of the axis, right? So I don't just want the value going true false. I also want the axis option. So is there, guys, is there another type of collection I could use that you guys can think of? So right now I have index, right, which is an array. How about some kind of dictionary, like with key value pairs, right? Huh?
That's how we do it. And
Right?
we actually add to it dynamically.
So think about that, right? What is there a dictionary in JavaScript? You guys know? How about the people in the corner that I keep talking?
You just reference it like an array that you give whatever key you want.
Okay. So you're just like an associative array, you mean? So this array string is equal to an associative array you're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way.
So again, what I want to do is I want to say that left stick is equal to, you know, if left, like horizontal axis is equal to this, whatever it's going to be, right? So that's the 0 and 1, horizontal and vertical. That's what those things are, horizontal and vertical axis. That's what index is. So when index is horizontal, good. But I need to also know the value, whatever this value is. So when gamepad.axis 0 index is this, what's the axis value, right? Axis value, right? So it's almost like I need either another array that has a bunch of values, whatever those values are, right? Or for that particular index. So this is neat and all, right? This 0 is neat and all because it's Boolean, it's true or false, it's on or off, right? But I'm only ever going to be checking 0 and 1, right? 2 and 3. I'm never going to check any other axis on my machine here, right? My gamepad. So therefore, I don't need it to be a Boolean. I need it to be a number again. Go back. I know I've changed it a bunch of times, but there's a reason for all this, right? We're just experimenting. And let's go back to number, because that's all he wants. And of course, down here, that's got to be a number array as well. And what we can say is that index is equal to the number, whatever this number is. So it's equal to this. That's the number that I'm going to get, right? I'm only going to check 0 and 1 anyway. 0 and 1, right? So, and then now this is the dead zone. We're going back to 0 again. We're going to make that 0. That's back to what it was. Okay? Does that make sense? So I don't need to track multiple things and make an associative array. I already have one. So what I need to do then is in my input, when I want to move my player, here's my player, as long as the input is right and left, I'm going to check to see what that is, right? If it's positive, then I move to the right. If it's negative, I move to the left. Does that make sense? So let's do one of these. This is in my player class. And do something like, okay, if managers.input.gamepad1.axes, and then config.gamepad.vertical or horizontal. That's right and left, right? That's all I care about. If that is greater than 0, then I'm going to move to the right, I believe. Otherwise, if it's less than 0, then I'm going to move to the left. It's negative to 0.2 and positive to positive to 0.2, negative to negative 0.2. 0.2 to negative 0.2. That's my zone. So let's see if that works. Yeah. There you go, Pedro. Gamepad controls, buddy. That's not bad. It's pretty good. Take a look, guys. Want to try it out, Pedro? So you can be satisfied.
Let's see.
It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's just for you, man. I did it right just for you, man. Just for you. Because in other classes, they don't have that kind of thing at all. There's no need for gamepad controls whatsoever.
Well, they're especially useful for us because our project is definitely better with gamepad controls.
Yeah, we have full as opposed to just like.
Yeah, including rotation.
Is it too slow?
The movement from side to side is way too slow. Also, because the clouds are so fast, I would honestly like the 2 full degrees of movement.
Up and down?
Yeah.
Oh, you're killing me. Anyways, but look, guys, you have the pattern there. Like the pattern is there to use. Now I'm gonna put it up on GitHub, and you're good to go. All right. But yeah, maybe what we can do is we can increase just to appease the Pedro, right? We can make it so that it is 10 instead of 5, and then yeah, so much for an animation. But let's see if that's better. Yeah, that's much better.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that looks more responsive to me, and we're good to go, right? It's still, a different kind of move than moving with keyboard and mouse for sure. Anyone else want to try it? How about Gabriel? Come over, Gabriel. Let's try it.
Now we just need to actually make it hard. Like we just keep cranking the speed of everything until
right. Exactly. No, you're exactly right. That's exactly what you do, right? So it's not bad, right? In terms of thing. What do you think?
That's pretty good.
Huh?
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean that's a web game, right? So it's like, so again, think about this, right? You can have keyboard, mouse, and gamepad as a backup if it exists, right? And if you want to, mouse, like keyboard, mouse by itself, you have your option screen and do it all, right?
Add bullet patterns to the end.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So that they actually do movements across the screen and some people are playing Toho.
Yes, do that. Yeah. Any questions around gamepad access? So, I mean, the only thing that's left now is cleanup, right? We have to clean this up a little bit. So, again, notice that it's config.gamepad.horizontal. I'm going to just appease, my friend and put in gamepad vertical. So there's my gamepad. That's why I put those in there. So this is my vertical for this, for 0 and 1, right? And we can also put mouse look. That's the other one, 2 and 3, right? So the other axis, if I really want, I haven't put that in there, but I could totally put that in there as well. And let's just, we'll use this as Y. So if this goes up, I believe this would have to be a negative, because that's going to be negative is up and positive is down, right? If I'm not wrong. Yes. All right, so let's try this. So then now you can see full vertical and horizontal move. Whoa, that is way too fast. I don't know what happened there, but it's gone, baby, gone. All right. Let's try that again. So, well, okay. What did I do wrong? Oh, no. That's what I did wrong. It doesn't go back. This goes forward, 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 right? All right, and I don't check, oh, the other way around. I don't check vertical greater. Okay, so this is weird. It's got to be this way. Why?
Oh yeah, I think I did. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Why?
Wow, that is crazy fast, man. I don't think Pedro's too fast. Too fast, Pedro. This is
How fast was that?
too fast. This has got to go down. The vertical.
Yeah, vertical always has to be the ratio of the screen has to be.
Yeah, no, it can't be. This is too, like, it's too. This is okay.
Yeah, that looks proper.
So. And I'm off screen. Yay!
Oh.
And I'm not going back on screen
Did
anymore.
it clip out?
No, it's because I don't have a boundary bottom. I never needed a bottom boundary for my plane, right? So I never checked for boundary bottom. All right, so that is your. I'm just going to put in stuff like that says gamepad controls, right? Based on the structure that we've created today. And we'll put this stuff somewhere on the bottom, just in case you guys want to do that too. That we just you can just uncheck those and you're good to go. Okay. And now it's back to keyboard and mouse. I think even the keyboard needs to be a little bit quicker. I think the 10 and 10, that was good. That was really good. That felt good. That felt much better than the 5 and 5 and 5. It was just too slow. Yeah, that's good. Yep. It feels really good, guys. A bit more challenging than the key. I like the gamepad more. I'm just addicted to gamepad. It's my fault. It's you know, we play gamepad for a long enough time. And all right, so for next time, so that we didn't really cover this one, but we'll cover it next week anyway while you guys are doing play testing and all that stuff. Again, I reserve week 11 and 12 for play testing, and then you'd sub it in. So we didn't quite get done what I wanted to get done today, but that's okay. We got gamepad controls and keyboard controls and it works good. So again, things to note for next time. First, let's put this all up in GitHub. So added gamepad support. This does. We'll add all this in there. So you guys have all that code if you want to use it for your games. Okay. But things to note for next time. And we have to have a small discussion on this. We talked about it briefly last time. But we need to talk about it at more length this time because we can't do much more today because we're down at the end. We're 7:15. And what I need to do takes at least an hour. I know I've done it before many times. I'm not going to spend an extra hour today. I can't. I can't do it. However, one thing to note is the changes we need to create for this to work. So right now in my core game, I have all this. And this is okay. It preloads everything. But I need to move away from this structure, and I need to move towards sprite sheets. Okay? In order for me to make animation work well, I can make animation work with bitmaps, but it's really messy. It's much better when I have sprite sheets. And a sprite sheet is a collection of bitmaps that are put in a particular location. Create.js does really well with them in terms of the way it manages where the sprites are located on the bitmap. And it has two things. We create something called the texture atlas. And the texture atlas points, there's two files. There's the file that's almost like a JSON file that points to the bitmap and tells Create.js where on the bitmap that particular sprite is located. Okay? And then when I want to move to the next sprite, it can do the animation for me nicely. Now, this is where I'm not sure P5 can do what Create.js can do, right? Going back to what we talked about with P5, right? Create.js is a fully embraced and engaged animation system built in. Like, it actually does really cool animations right in there, and it's awesome. Like, it actually does lerping and slurping and all that kind of crazy stuff all built in. Whereas I'm not sure P5 has that capability out of the box, but it's supposed to be pretty good, so it may. So if you notice our game object, and I'm not going to do this today, but in our game object superclass, right? So if I go to game object, our game object is a bitmap. And my friends, that has to change. If I'm going to start moving with animations, the game objects that are on the screen can't be bitmaps. Does it exist?
Not by default, but there's a coding challenge by the creator that implements it in 20 minutes.
Does it? In 20 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. But to me, if we move this to sprites instead of bitmaps, wow, that is a big change, because that means that every object, including buttons, becomes sprites. And that's okay. I'm just saying that some sprites are going to have 0 animations, and some sprites are going to have multi-frame animations. And some animations are going to have you can vary the speed of the animations that are different than the game speed. So the game speed might be 60 frames per second, which is what we're trying to run at. But the animation speed might be only 5, right? You may only have 5 frames, right? So you may want to cut it down to, like, I don't know, 20% of 60 frames per second, that kind of thing. And there's ways of doing that with the animation system that's built in. So it's a big change. So there's 2 possibilities here. We leave it as is and wait more time for optimization, and then don't create another class called the actor, right? That inherits from game object. Because, for example, buttons can be bitmaps. It's okay. Like, buttons don't need to animate typically. I'm saying in terms of, like, flappy animation, right? If you want to make buttons smooth, and you want to make buttons glint, and you want to make buttons, shine, those kinds of weird effects with light, then you can make it so that it is a sprite that has multiple, like, when the button is activated, when you hover over the button, it activates an animation that does, in the background, that changes the image to make it look like something. I mean, yes, you can do that with the button. You can make it as fancy or as simple as you want. You can make the button shake and do all these different things and grow and shrink and whatever. But for our purposes, a button doesn't need to do that. All it needs to be is a button, a bitmap. And the same thing goes with some of the other things. Island, okay, doesn't really need to animate though, right? The island doesn't do anything. The island just sits there and just moves down the screen. So there's no animation for the island. And the same thing goes for the clouds. The clouds don't really animate. They don't morph, right? They don't, like, change shape, and they don't have multiple, although it would be neat if we made the clouds change shape, like in the middle of their thing, like almost like, so the cloud starts big and then it kind of morphs as it moves, like almost like an amoeba or something crazy. That might be interesting. Weird, but interesting, right? But again, I think that we don't need it for it to happen. Labels, same thing. I mean, they're not ocean, definitely not. even the ocean's not, I mean, right now the ocean is a game object, right? But the ocean would not need to be, it could not be, if you think about it, it could not be a sprite, because that means we'd have to keep it in a sprite sheet, and that is a very large sprite sheet. Our sprite sheet for the ocean would be something massive if we include the ocean there as well. I mean, I'm just saying, player for sure, that would definitely be, that's one that would be a good candidate. Same thing with enemy. I think enemy would be a good candidate for animations, but island and cloud and bullet, same. I mean, bullet doesn't need to be an animation enabled thing, unless it like changed shape or wobbled or something weird. And
I mean, you could add an animation.
I'm just saying, you can make it so that when you fire it, it starts small and then it warps and then it kind of comes together. I mean, there's lots of really weird things you could do. But where we need animations are explosions. So whenever I hit something, you know, the animation, it actually explodes and creates like an animation type effect, right? Where it's a multi-frame explosion animation. However, you could also move to particle system-based animations, or particle system-based explosions, as opposed to animations entirely. So you have a little particle system that goes off whenever it explodes, right? Which is actually very neat too, because particles, I mean, it's just juicier to have a particle system than to have an explosion animation, right? Just saying. So there's different options here. So next week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the first option, which is frame-based, you know, explosions and frame-based animation, right? Again, the particle system stuff I have, yeah, I programmed it already, but the particle system stuff is heavy duty. It actually has a lot of overhead to make the particle system work, because particle systems on JavaScript, it's like, you know, beyond in terms of, you know, what it can be done, right?
Not
it's
exactly
like,
something you can multi-thread properly.
It's hard without using WebGL and all that kind of stuff. And then you have to mix WebGL with, like, you could actually, I'd have to move this game from, you know, stage to stage GL, and it does break. It breaks.
A lot of things, but
It breaks.
not everything.
And where it breaks a lot is the colors. The colors break in stage GL. You have to create like your own shaders and everything else, and you know what? It goes beyond the scope of the course. All right, questions around movement and controls. That's what we really covered today. We didn't really cover animation, but this is kind of part one of the movement, controls, and animation series. All right, guys, that's it for me. Thank you so much for sticking around. Remember that tonight you have your beta release due. That includes your updated GDD, right, and your peer review. So I'm going to, before I leave, I'm going to create those drop boxes. They're due tonight at midnight. And then starting next week, we're going to be doing play testing, where you have a chance to, you know, play each other's games. And there's 3 groups here. So hopefully we'll all have a chance to play each other's games and give feedback. There is an exercise that's worth marks starting next week. All right. So it's not like, hey, let's play everyone's game and there's nothing to it. No, it's let's play everyone's game and give feedback, and then get feedback and use that feedback to modify your game to make it better. That's what the idea is. Okay. Okay. And that's it for me. I will see you guys next week. For the group in the corner, I definitely want to talk to you guys before you go. Otherwise, you guys are all good to go.